My name's Jeff, and I'm an alcoholic. And my suspect is Dayne, and I don't know how much we're supposed to do in the way of introductions of our suspect. I've had the pleasure of going through the process of the 12 steps with Dayne, who I consider a friend, and he'd been through this program prior and has some familiarity of it and is really thoughtful about it. And so the way I look at it is we kind of just got to do it together, and I've got to learn as much from him, and probably more than he ever did from me. So it's my privilege to introduce the highly suspicious Dayne.
Thanks, Jeff. Dayne, alcoholic. I just, when I share at meetings, sometimes, like want to read a section of the book or relate it to something out of the book. And I was, kind of trying to do that for tonight, and just nothing really seemed to fit. And I don't usually have trouble finding a passage that fits. Maybe it's that they all fit where I'm at right now. And so I just thought I'd, tell you a bit about what it was like and what happened, and what's happened, what it's like now, and what I've been going through lately. And I started drinking at a pretty young age. I think I was 11 the first time me and my friend mixed all my dad's stuff together and drank way too much of it. And, I got really drunk that night, and so did he. And I remember not being able to stand up straight. And I'm not sure how I crawled up into my loft to go to sleep, but my dad was away that night. Usually, he stayed out pretty late a lot. I know that I, puked out my bedroom window all down the side of the house, and it was purple because there were it was red wine and ouzo and some Grand Marnier and some other sort of horrible, noxious things mixed together. But he slept in the front part of the house, so I was able to get up in the morning and wash everything off, and he never found out about it, as far as I know. If he did, he never mentioned anything. And so that was the beginning of, the subterfuge of alcoholism and addiction, as I later came to know it. So here I am. I did this thing I wasn't supposed to do. I know that I'm not supposed to do it. It was pretty fun, and I was able to cover my tracks and get away with it. The other side of that story is I was pretty sick, and I didn't want to do that again. So it was a number of years. I think it was I was 14, before I really started drinking with my friends again. And I picked friends I ended up with friends that had similar family backgrounds to me, which is to say that we did not have a lot of parental supervision. And these guys drank a lot. They could drink like fish. And I was never that good at drinking as much as them, but I did try to keep up. And I was introduced to lots of drugs along the way, and I did all that kind of stuff. And so the long story short, by the time I'm 19, I got my first DUI, and that led to an outpatient treatment that was court ordered. And so when I was 20, I got sober for the first time. Shortly after going to my first AA meeting, and I think it was, sometime in 1989, I went with some friends of mine that were, getting sober. And I remember the first one was Fremont Hall and on Greenwood. And it was packed. It was the room, in my memory, the room was 3 times the size. But when you're younger, places seem bigger. So I don't know for sure, but it was packed. And there was coffee, and there was cigarettes, and there was a lot of, conviviality and joking. It was raucous. The meeting started, And, I remember like a few people sharing that made a big impact on me. One guy was like a deep sea diver, and he talked about how, his life was a wreck, and then he got sober, and now he's a underwater, welder or something, and all the adventures that it's, brought to him. And I was pretty impressed by that guy's story. And so not too long after that, I'm in outpatient and starting to learn about my disease and my using and my drinking. And by this point, I'd already been like addicted to heroin for a couple of years, and I got managed to get clean off of that, but I was still drinking, and that's when I got the DUI. And so it's sort of, it was all this mishmash of just, substances, and I didn't really care too much, what they were. But getting sober the first time, my life started to change like right away. And I was lucky to have like good people sort of guiding me in treatment, and I was going to a lot of meetings. I got a sponsor, and in a couple of years, my life, became totally different. And I was starting to do things that I dreamed about but never imagined possible. And I was having a lot of success with all that. I was going back to school, and this whole time I'm like playing music too. So and having a lot of pretty for a 21-year-old or whatever, pretty successful at that in my own way, and having a lot of fun with that. And so then I'm going to school and I'm sober and I'm doing the steps. And after about 5 years, I'm like working full time and going to school full time, and pretty burnt out and pretty tired, and I drifted away from the program. And then I got the opportunity to play in a band that was doing pretty well at the time. So I quit everything and I'm just playing rock and roll. And I think you probably have an idea how maybe this turned out. Not so well. I stopped going to meetings. I drifted away, and then I started drinking again because at the time I was like, well, I'm not really an alcoholic. I'm more of a junkie, and I'm not doing that. So I drank pretty successfully for about 4 months. Um, Often too much, but I still wasn't connecting the dots. And then I started using heroin again. I got strung out again, and that led to like 6 years of being, pretty strung out and being near death for, quite a bit of that time. And eventually I did, rock bottom. And this time I came into the program without the courts, and I didn't end up getting in any trouble. I was just like, well, this, fortunately I knew a lot of people here. And so, yeah, I just started going to meetings again, and some friends saved me, and they took me to a lot of meetings, and I sobered up, and that led to, you know, 7 really good years of sobriety, and things got better right away. I was having a great life. I was, having quite a bit of success in my chosen profession, kind of like advancing much further, faster than I ever thought possible, um, and then the same sort of thing happened again. I got bored, or I started to drift away, or there's things. Actually, here's the main thing. And this is what I've taken out of years of reflecting back on this. And this is a long time ago now. I was praying for some things, and I didn't understand that the way I was coming at it was kind of skewed. I was praying for a lot of like understanding, for like I was praying for a lot of like to help with confusion or uncertainty, and I was not getting answers to my prayers in the way that I wanted to. And so I became resentful, and I became distrustful of the program. And this is after doing steps. This is the third time through with this, So I had like an intellectual knowledge of the steps, but I was still missing some really big things. And I'd come to my sponsor, who's sponsored lots of people before me and since me, and I don't know. I just couldn't understand that the way I was coming at it was counter to a spiritual experience. But now I see that the uncertainty and the confusion is actually a part of the spiritual experience, and I've done a lot of work towards sitting with that stuff and feeling it, feeling it, allowing the void to exist without fixing it or without needing to change it or make it go away. And, I've been fairly successful compared to previous years, of getting behind that. So fast forward after that relapse, it took me quite a while to come back here. I was off, I was sober, not sober. I had 2 years clean once. I had 6 months another time. And eventually I was just like, okay, I'm not going to be Mr. Sober. I'm not going to be totally fucked up. I'm just going to smoke pot. And that's what I did for a couple of years. Was I smoked pot every single day. I'd start in the morning and I'd smoke it through the day and I'd smoke it at night. And that worked really well for a little while until I just simply couldn't get stoned anymore. And then I'm like, now I'm really, really screwed. What do I do now? And, at this point, failed relationships had happened. And, I shot myself in the foot so many times with the profession that was, no longer anything I could do. And so I came in again, like more broken than ever before. And, this time when I came in, I was in a relationship and she had been using a lot and we both got clean at the same time and things did get better because you remove active alcoholism addiction and things get better. But it wasn't like before. There was no like, suddenly everything's wonderful. There was no pink cloud. This was just like the opportunity for me to see where I ended up on my own direction. And so it was in this period of time, this was a few years ago now, almost 3 years ago. That's when I met my current sponsor, Jeff, and started going through the steps again. And, had, I guess, more of an educational version. I'm trying to remove the drama and the knee-jerk responses to my life and look at really what's going on and see what my problems are and to see how I can maybe show up different for the people in my life. And in those years a lot actually changed without changing much about how I felt. Still got to go to work doing a job I really don't like very much, and struggles in my band and struggles in my relationship, but showing up for my family, calling my dad back, answering the phone when they would call me, doing things for my brother, doing things for my friends, helping out without trying to get out of things. Somebody'd ask me to do something, I'd do it. And it wasn't the first time that I'd done stuff like that, but it was just I was more consistent, and I'm convinced that this is part of how I have to live, is to try and be helpful to the people around me, and not just the people that I'm really close with, but they got to come first too, but other people in the program, and and that was pretty helpful, and a lot of things did improve. I'm very, I'm like familiar with a gratitude list and how much that helps, and I do that. My prayer life goes up and down. My understanding of a connection with a higher power, it ebbs and flows or ebbs and wanes, but it comes and goes. But I don't have any big resentment against God anymore. That's a big change, and I don't. I also don't have a really strong connection with the higher power. I try sometimes, and I feel it sometimes, and other times I'm just like, I have to do the best I can. And I have to try and stay sane, and that's been difficult. So I'm still in a band with the woman that's now my ex. We've remained friends the whole time, but there's been a lot of toxicity in our relationship. And we recently went on tour, and I'm in Germany, and she's fighting with me the whole time. And I'm trying to be a really nice guy, but that's not working out too well. And she has an artistic way of fighting with me that, gets under the skin. And I'm sure maybe you guys can relate with significant others in your lives or in your past. But eventually it really, after the tour was over and the stress would just build. And, and I lost my temper and then I lost my sobriety. So I had like a night, after our tour's over, a couple nights before I come home, and I'm alone in the middle of a panic attack at a restaurant in Berlin, and I had a couple drinks. And you could maybe call them three because the first one was kind of a doozy. But the point was, it's like I got into a place where I needed to feel different than all the cortisol and all the adrenaline that was going through my bloodstream. And it's like that happened. And so now I'm back here and the ego's, demolished. And, I'm like, okay, not such solid ground after all. I have to like keep on trying to do this stuff. And since I've been back, it's been like 34 days now. I have 34 days clean and sober since that day. And I've been going to meetings, a lot of meetings since I've come back. And those are really helpful too. And I'm just taking a breath, and I know that there's a lot to look at. And but the thing that I have learned through all my ins and outs and relapses is the worst possible thing to do in this program is to stop coming. And so I'm going to keep coming back because the big relapses are when I like stop coming and I'm on personal recognizance. I'm like doing it Dayne's way, and that has always led to certain destruction. So, I figure I'm going to just keep coming back, and I'm going to keep my ears open and my open mind and see where it goes from here. And at the very least, I'm not, trying to shove this under the rug. I'm really, really grateful that it was one night, and I have no desire to keep going. And I'm just glad to be here. I didn't really want to be here to share with you guys like this. I'd much rather be like, hey, check out how awesome I am now. But I'm just like an alcoholic, and I really do. I have no control over my disease. I do have a responsibility to take steps to treat it. And so that's why I'm here. Hope you get something out of this. And I'm glad that my sponsor's up next to share something a little more positive, perhaps. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Behind me. Jeff, I met him in service work when I became a GSR up north. And I then got into the intergroup rep type stuff, and Jeff was always there. And never could recognize him because his beard kept on growing during COVID. And it was just, who's this guy? And then we got to do service together here at the board meeting and all, and with Greater Seattle Intergroup. So it's a pleasure for me to introduce the only person that tells me and reminds me that my spiritual condition is my daily reprieve. Well, yeah. Okay. My spiritual condition is dependent on my daily. I get a daily reprieve. There we go. That's what I'm trying to do. Jeff, take it away. Yay.
Thanks, Mike. Love you, man. I'm Jeff. I'm an alcoholic.
Jeff.
And my sobriety is contingent on the daily maintenance of my spiritual condition.
That's it.
That's it. And I always start all my shares with that. And I'll come back to that in a little bit, I think. And I think your story is very hopeful, Dayne. So I think it's a positive one. A lot like Dayne and a lot of other people, I started drinking. I discovered alcohol at 14 or 15 with friends and sneaking out and mixing my parents' stuff all together and getting sick. And the minute that I first felt that flow through me and that sense of ease and comfort, I began to live for that. I lived for the weekends where were we going to get our booze? Where were we going to be drinking? Where was the party? And it was all about, that next time. And, I was life of the party kind of drunk for a long time. I was the swing from the chandeliers and do the keg stands and be out of control. And I did that through high school, and I did that into college. And I was, you know, the kind of alcoholic, and I know there's a lot of us like this who are pretty resilient. I could destroy something, and then I could drag myself back up and rebuild. I could not go to class for weeks, just getting wasted, and then I could drag myself in and make excuses and do what I had to do to pass a class, and then, you know, maybe have to drop some, and then I could get to the next semester. And I was in and out of school for years to get a degree, you know, into community college, back to WSU, back to community college, back to WSU. And it was all about the parties and all about the crazy stories. And, you know, I was joking before the meeting that maybe tonight I would just spend the whole time telling drunk stories and never get to what happened and what it's like now. I won't really do that, but I could, because I've got 100 hours of those kind of stories, you know, that I thought were really fun. I thought I was just a really free living, wild life of the party guy from in my 20s, doing it my way. Wasn't being held down by the man. And what it really meant was that I would just destroy everything I was involved in. And you know, have successes and then destroy them. And you know, for about the first 15 years of my drinking and drug use thrown in, that's what it was like. I owned some businesses that I ended up destroying. I had relationships that I destroyed. I had financial success and ruin multiple times. I lived in all different parts of the country. I was something didn't work, I'd move somewhere else. Relationship didn't work, I'd go to the next one. And you know, I ended up back in Seattle in my early 30s and kind of decided I wanted to settle down, and maybe it was time to have a relationship and maybe get married or maybe have kids. But I couldn't quit drinking. It was in my early 30s that I discovered, you know, okay, I just made decisions that I'm going to stop this, and then I couldn't stop, and then I'm going to do it again, and I couldn't stop. I'm going to stop using drugs, and I couldn't. And you know, I got into a serious relationship with someone that had kids, and that I thought I wanted to maybe, you know, get married to. And I was having to live kind of two lives. I was trying to pretend to be a sober, upstanding guy around family, but really I wasn't that, you know, most of the time. And that's when I discovered I couldn't stop. And I ended up losing that relationship because of drinking and using, and I reached a point where I was really my first big bottom, my first big realization that I've got a serious problem, and I ended up walking through the doors of this program for the first time. And this was about 2002, and I was living on my brother's couch down in Des Moines, and I had burned everything down in my life. And I actually looked up in the phone book, the real phone book, when there was a phone book, and found Seattle Intergroup and called here and asked, what do you guys do? How can you help me? And they told me, oh, there's a meeting up the road in Normandy Park. I'll pass it on. You can check it out even later tonight. And I knew so little about how all this worked that I was actually asking them, well, do I need to be on the list, or are you gonna tell them that I'm coming? And I remember the guy telling me on the phone, don't worry, man, they're expecting you. And I went up to that meeting, and I walked in the door, and I sat in the very back, when they called on me, I cried, and I shared about what a disaster my life was, and afterwards I talked to some people, and they pointed out that if I had insurance, I could go to an outpatient recovery program, which I did through group health, and in that shot through, I did 90 meetings in 90 days, and I got about 90 days sober, and I did the outpatient program, and then I immediately relapsed. And then I did another 90 days, and then I relapsed. And throughout those meetings, going to that hall and to, you know, some other meetings, I would read the steps and the traditions on the wall at every meeting, and I would think about them a lot. And I thought that meant that I'd done them. I thought I knew how this thing works. I need to get spiritual. I need to apologize for things from my past. I need to help other people. I think I kind of got how this works, and there's no reason I need to come around this bunch of losers for the rest of my life every day. I can go do this and stay sober myself. I had Jeff's 3.5-step program of recovery that I was going to do. And that led to 13 more years out there drinking and using, trying to do it my way. You know, I think maybe I took the first half of step 1. I admitted I was an alcoholic. And I even kind of came to believe that there was a God that could probably help me if I were to seek help. But I wasn't ready to do that, and I didn't do it for a long time. And so then I knew I was an alcoholic, but I still was drinking and using for years. And I ended up losing a marriage. And I went through all the things that everybody here is probably familiar with. And I won't tell too much more than what it was like story, because it was legal troubles, it was jails, it was wrecked cars, it was lost relationships, it was financial ruin, it was health issues, it was, thing after thing. And it eventually, coming up on 9 years ago now, it wasn't all those material things and all those consequences. They didn't get me in the door. They didn't get me to stop. It was getting in a dark enough, miserable enough place in my own head where I hated myself enough, where I was convinced I couldn't do anything, that I was hopeless. And I got to, and I had burned my life down again. I destroyed another career. No idea what I was going to do. I had my brother, whom I had stolen money from and been estranged from with my behavior, had told me sometime previous, 9 months or a year before, that, had I ever thought about maybe getting some help, going into a rehab, doing something like that, and said that he'd help me if I wanted to do something like that. And at the time, I told him to F off. Sounds like you're the one with the problem, not me. But I got to a point where I was so desperate that I called my brother, and we went to lunch, and I said, "Do you remember when you said that thing about how maybe you help me out?" And he did it. He drove me over to Eastern Washington and wrote a check to a rehab place and dumped me through the doors of a place. And on that trip over there and getting dumped through those doors, I had to quit my job working for the people I worked for. I was pretty certain that I was going to end up going to jail or prison. I had no idea where my life was going to go, what was going to happen to me, or what recovery was going to look like, or how it worked even. Really, I didn't know. I was a blank slate in my future life. But I experienced this incredible sense of relief because I made a decision. I was just going to do whatever it was people who had successfully stayed clean and sober told me to do. Wasn't going to make any more decisions. I wasn't going to fight anymore. I was going to quit the debating society, as it says in the 12 and 12. And I got a massive sense of relief from that decision. That I felt like I was finally done fighting. And I went into that center with a new faith that things were going to be all right. And fortunately, it was a 12-step based program where they took you through your first 5 steps in that process. And I was just open-minded to it all. I just did everything I was told. And to the extent that I've been able to maintain that attitude since then, I have success in this program. Not swimming against the current anymore, but going with the current is kind of how I look at it. And, the things they told me to do were when I got out that I needed to find a home group and I needed to find a sponsor and I needed to go through the process of doing the 12 steps really seriously with that person. And that's what I did. I look back on that surrender moment as now the time when I finally took the second half of step 1 and I took step 3. I finally decided that my life was unmanageable by me and that I needed to turn that over. I didn't know then who or what I was turning it over to, but I was done driving and I was handing over the wheel. And today I look at it as handing over the wheel to a power greater than me that I can call God, I can call a higher power, I can call um, my own spiritual connection that keeps me sober. I can call it the opposite of ego, which is kind of what I consider God to be. Um, and that connection and that belief has served me since then. I did find a home group. My home group is Walk the Talk Men's Group in Burien. The day I got out of that treatment center, I actually was taken to that meeting back over in Seattle, and it's been my home group ever since then, the last coming up on 9 years. I got myself a sponsor, and I started going through that process, the process of the steps. And, I had previously been able to quit drinking and using for periods of time. I did it throughout my marriage. I had an 8-year marriage in there where I constantly was quitting and constantly swearing off and constantly promising that I was done. And I could go a week, a month, 2 months, a couple times, 3 or 4 months. But I would become more and more miserable without my medicine, without drinking. I became an intolerable, miserable person until I had to have it again. And then I would drink again until things were wrecked, and then I would quit again, and I would repeat that cycle. And what happened in the program is these steps didn't help me to stop drinking because I could stop drinking. What they did was teach me to live in a way that I didn't have to restart. After the process of, for me, it happened around step 9 when I started making some amends, and I was maybe 5 months into this latest round of recovery, and I was sitting there one day and I realized that the obsession was gone. I could sit on my back porch and I could listen to the birds and I could listen to the kids play and I could feel comfortable in my own skin and have some peace of mind. And I don't think I had that for 30 plus years. And that was the gift. That was the change. I didn't need to reach for something to get out of my own head. And I don't always have that, but I have it some. And this program, I think, is what's given me that. It's given me some faith. It's given me some serenity. It's given me some peace of mind. And it was the practice of going through that process of self-searching, of cleaning up the past, of making things right. And I can talk a little about what that looked like and has looked like for me. I was a big carrier of resentments. For all those 30 years when things were going wrong, I had a story, a narrative in my own head of what was the cause of my troubles. And it was other people. It was my mother. It was my ex-wife. It was my ex-girlfriend. It was people who treated me poorly. It was people who caused me trauma. It was bad things that happened to me. And there were bad things that happened to me, and people did do bad. I had plenty of excuses. But that was my story, and I carried around those things with me at all times. And what the program did was help me let go of that stuff. Resentments were my major killer. Those were what would wind me up when I would quit on my own. I would become super resentful in a short order of time. And I got to let go of a lot of that. I got to forgive people. I got to rebuild relationships. I got to find some peace with my parents. I got to find a whole new relationship with my daughter, who was 12 years old when I got sober. She's 21 now, and we've had a spectacular relationship through her high school years and now into her time as a young adult. And I've got to be there and be a huge part of that, and we've got to be super close. And I wasn't that dad before she was 12 years old. That's the gift of this. That's probably my biggest gift in this, is that I've got to have that. I've got to rebuild a relationship with my parents that had been very estranged for 30 years. And, my mom is still a pain in the ass, but I can handle her now. I can help her and my dad with things, and I can forgive her for doing the best that she could, even in ways that she may have caused harm to me. And that's a huge change. I can be a part of their lives. I can be a part of family and friends' lives. You know, I was open and willing enough in the process of the steps that I really embraced step 12 and have remained dedicated to service throughout the time that I've been involved in the program. Um, and that's been a huge difference maker for me. You know, the trying to live the way that is recommended and being willing to do it, that's been super important. I mean, going to meetings is big, staying connected is big, having friends and fellowship and calling people and all of that, but just trying to be of service has been a huge piece. Um, you know, I had some experiences in my first year or two, since we got a bunch of time in this thing for me to kill. Some stories of how these steps played out and still do that have been important to me that are kind of benchmarks in my recovery. You know, in my first year and a half in the program, I couldn't drive. I hadn't had a license for years before I got sober, but I drove and I went to jail and for driving on a suspended license, and then I didn't show up for court, and then I drove until they arrested me again, and I went to jail, and then I got out. I did that for years, and so I finally started living by the law when I got sober, and I couldn't drive for a couple of years. Well, I had to clean up lots and lots and lots of messes, lots of court cases, lots of collections, lots of just endless stuff like that I'd worked on in my first few years, but I had to have people drive me to meetings, which I did all the time, which was great. It kept my world a little smaller where it needed to be. And I was at a Friday night meeting that someone had driven me to in my first year of sobriety. And I was being dropped off late at my house, which I had just managed to hang on to, a rental house that I lived in. I'd hung on to by the skin of my teeth when I got sober. And I got home and I walked to the front door, and the door was hanging on its hinges, and someone had kicked the door in while I was gone, and they had trashed the house and stolen, you know, the television and the computers and the stereo system. And I had my daughter at that time. You know, she was 13, and I had her part of the time, and her room had been ransacked and all of her stuff. And, the place was trashed, and it was, you know, I had the big upsurge of emotion. I was really pissed. I was really freaked out. And it was one of those times where I was able to catch myself and say, okay, I'm in this program. What am I supposed to do? And I called my sponsor, and I called some friends in my home group, and guys came over to my house, and people came and helped. They helped me fix my door. And, you know, and they sat with me and talked me through stuff and helped me clean the place up. You know, and the next day when my daughter came over, she was pretty traumatized by what had happened to her room and her stuff. And, you know, we had to talk through that. And you know, I had these new relationships with my family, and my brother brought me a computer that he bought. And my dad brought over a new television, and it was like really overwhelming support from a whole bunch of people that really took me by surprise in that first period of time, you know, maybe 9 months sober. And my daughter and I walked into, so we needed to get away from the house, and we walked into town for dinner. And I remember her and I sitting there talking about how amazing it was, you know, that all these great people in our lives who were willing to step up and help us. And we had a whole gratitude discussion about how amazing it was we had a house to live in. And she was so grateful that I was sober. And I was so grateful that I had friends in the program willing to help me out. And it was just this really moving, wonderful experience of, look how differently this has gone than things used to go in the past. And we walked back home, and she went to bed, and then I was sitting there in the living room, and I thought to myself, you know what I'm supposed to do? What this program says I'm supposed to do, I'm supposed to pray for that person who broke into my house. So I sat there and I did that. And I thought, you know what? You know, the neighbor's house across the street had the same thing happen. And I thought, you know, I can put myself in this person's shoes. I have a pretty good understanding probably of what their life is, what they're doing, what they're probably having to try to do every day to feed whatever it is they got to feed. They're probably a pretty miserable state, and I'm doing beautifully. You know, my life is great, and I feel horrible for them. And I prayed that they would find what I had, you know, and that they would be freed of whatever it was that led to that. And it was really a wonderful feeling of living differently. You know, it was a time that where I was overwhelmed with what this program can do and how it can, and, you know, a week later, I came across my neighbor, you know, out in the road, and he was going on about, you know, he'd got a new gun and new security cameras, and he had all these theories about who had broken into our houses and on. He was all fired up, and I had literally forgotten about it. I had moved on. I was thinking about and doing other things, you know, and I kind of felt bad for him. It's like, you know what? I'm past that. You know, I don't have to live in that anymore. You know, it's a great thing, you know. So there's another story that was maybe a little later in my sobriety. I had a neighbor in that same house, and some of the neighbors around there didn't really like that house was a rental anyway. They don't like renters, and my neighbor would do a lot of complaining, calling my landlord, bitching about the lawn being too long, or I'd leave stuff out in the backyard, or whatever it was. It was always calling me, and he would run his leaf blower outside my windows really early in the morning. Just stuff that I would get worked up about, and I got a call from it was maybe a weekend, and I was in my living room, and I got a call from my landlord saying, "Hey, the neighbors are complaining that, you know, your Christmas tree from Christmas is still out behind the house. And it's a couple, it was spring, and it was all dead, and it was in the backyard, and the only way the neighbor could see it is to look over my fence. I mean, you know. But he had called, and my landlord called me, and there's my neighbor over in his driveway running his leaf blower. Like he spends all his time doing it. So I went storming over there and did, you know, what the F's wrong with you? Why can't you just come talk to me if you got a problem? We got into it, and, you know, yelling at each other, calling each other effing losers, and a whole riled up to where I was right on the edge of throwing a punch at the guy. And I ended up storming back into my house and sitting down on the couch, and I was shaking. I was that worked up. I was that pissed. I was shaking, and I was like, and then I had the same interrupted thought as that situation before, where I'm in this program and I'm supposed to be doing things a certain way, and I'm supposed to do a certain thing here. And it was probably one of the most uncomfortable and difficult things I've done in the whole program, is I forced myself to stand up off that couch. And I walked back over to the neighbors, and I knocked on his door, and I could see him coming down the hallway through the window. And he was sure I was there to reignite. He was coming, storming up to the door, thought I'm back to have it out. And he flung the door open, and I sat there and said, you know, hey man, I was out of line with, you know, some of the things I said and the way that I came at you. And I did an apology, and I tried to do an amends, and we ended up having a civil conversation where we ended up shaking hands. And, you know, things haven't been spectacular since then, but there's never been any punches thrown. And, you know, it diffused things. And I ended up going back to my house and sitting down. And again, it was that feeling of, wow, this is what this program is. This is way better way to live. You know, and I've found all along the way that the things that make me feel that way are usually the really uncomfortable when I go to do them to start with, but they're the payoff most of the time when I do that stuff. When I have the courage to do it, when I'm not afraid, you know, and I have tried to go through, you know, again with a different sponsor and a few different times through the steps in the years that I've been in the program, and I've continued to find out new things about myself. You know, discovering new character defects and discovering that I still have the same ones. I got sobriety by addressing the big stuff in the beginning, and now the program then in the years since has been about trying to be better at doing what I'm supposed to do, being a servant to a power greater than me and to my fellow man and to all living things. And that's what the program has been since then, is the process of trying to identify those shortcomings, trying to be a better person, trying to address them. The same ones that keep recurring, and the new ones that I discover. And it's an endless process. I have a favorite passage from the book lately too. I thought about reading. Maybe I will. So if anybody's got a book, any books?
Yep.
And my favorite passages in the book have changed over the years that I've been doing this. In the beginning, I was really about trying to find a spiritual understanding that worked for me. In pages 10, 11, 12, where Bill has Ebby come and visit him, and he talks about, with the world's religions, I parted right there, and all the death and chicanery and all the trouble that certain people's understanding of God has caused has turned me off a lot, and I related to that a lot. And then I really related, and I needed to hear where Ebby tells Bill, "Why don't you find your own conception of God?" That was really important to me. That part of this program has been important to me. I heard a great line at a meeting just the other day where somebody was saying, "Hey, that God that you've struggled with and had all these issues with and been so mad about that for all these years, that's not the one we're talking about here." And that helped me a lot. The one we're talking about here is the one that helps me. And so that was my favorite passage for a long time. But lately, my recent favorite passage is 275, and it's in the Keys of the Kingdom, which is a great story. And it's where she writes, "AA is not a plan for recovery that can be finished and done with. It is a way of life, and the challenge contained in its principles is great enough to keep any human being striving for as long as he lives. We cannot outgrow this plan. As arrested alcoholics, we must have a program for living that allows for limitless expansion. Keeping one foot in front of the other is essential for maintaining our arrestment. Others may idle in a retrogressive groove without too much danger, but retrogression can spell death for us. However, this isn't as rough as it sounds, as we do become grateful for the necessity that makes us toe the line, and we find that we are compensated for consistent effort by the countless dividends we receive." And I love that passage lately because I've found myself getting in a groove and found myself in a rut in the program at times. And this language about limitless expansion, I think that's my favorite phrase in the book right now. That there's no limit to what I can learn about myself. There's no limit to the people I can meet, the places I can go, the personal growth I can keep experiencing. In fact, I'm just at the beginning. 9 years I'm discovering is a beginning at this. And there's tons more ways I can become a better person. I like that passage also because I've always said if I was going to start a band in recovery, it would be Retrogressive Groove, right? But that's been important to me. And winding back, and I'll bring it all right back to where I started, which is my sobriety is contingent on the daily maintenance of my spiritual condition. I had a friend in my home group, a man who was really important to my sobriety, who passed away at the beginning of COVID. And he used to say that at the beginning of all of his shares, George G. He had 40 plus years in recovery. And, I decided to take that on when I started a share because George, number one, as a tribute to George because of how important he was to my recovery. And number two, because I need that reminder every day. I need to be connected in some way or another or I'm in trouble. I find I can go maybe 2 or 3 days without doing something recovery related, but then I'm in trouble. Um, and George was huge for me with that stuff. George had 44 years, I believe, when he passed, and he liked to say that his first 20 years in the program, his program was, "I'm not going to drink, and you can go fuck yourself." And and then he learned. Then he took the steps. So it goes to show that, you know, it's never too late. And George would be a whole nother story on his own. But, and I learned a lot from him, and along with so many other people in this program. I'm super grateful for everybody that I've had the pleasure to learn from. Anyway, I think I killed 30 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Did you stop? Did you stop at the 7 seconds? Okay. Well, I have 7 more seconds, but I'm not going to use them. Thanks, you guys. Thanks, Dayne.